Hey, Morgan. This is Mike at East at the Lafayette County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling in regards to a friend of yours, Ale Kostial.
The police came to the door and they told us there had been a homicide and that she was the victim.
Her smile, her light will never be forgotten. Ale Kostial's friends, they're making sure of that.
The Ole Miss student from St. Louis was shot to death last weekend. There must have been more than 100 people tonight to honor her. Ale's friends say they appreciate the turnout, but Ale would have appreciated even more.
In the summer of 2019, 21-year-old Ale Kostial was a junior at the University of Mississippi, known more commonly as Ole Miss. Ale was smart, driven, and involved in numerous activities. Up until then, her time at Ole Miss had been rewarding, fulfilling, and downright fun. However, there was one dark spot in her otherwise amazing college experience: her tumultuous on-again, off-again relationship with Brandon Theesfeld. On the surface, Ale and Brandon appeared to be the perfect couple, but Ale's friends didn't like Brandon or the way he treated her. They urged her to leave him and find someone who would give her the respect she deserved. Unfortunately, Ale didn't take their advice, and the consequences were nothing short of tragic. Alexandria Kostial was born in St. Louis, Missouri, on September 11, 1997, and her bubbly and outgoing personality began taking shape almost immediately. Ale always had lots of friends and was close with her parents, Cindy and Keith, and her younger brother Andrew. She had a relatively happy and uneventful childhood. As a teenager, she attended Lindbergh High School, where she was a cheerleader, ran track, and played on the golf team. Ale also participated in student government, was a member of the National Honor Society, and was driven to serve those less fortunate than she was. As such, she traveled to Africa and South America to teach English to poor children in rural communities. In high school, Ale and her friend Maddie Norris were so inseparable that they even went to the prom together. Most of Ale's friends went on to in-state colleges and universities after graduation, but she had always dreamed of attending Ole Miss in Oxford, Mississippi. Ale loved the school's rich history and its old-fashioned Southern charm. According to her mother, she was also a big fan of the school's top-notch football team.
She really wanted to be involved in a school that had that ranking, good football team.
More importantly, she thought it would be a great place to meet a future husband. With an academic record like Ale's, getting into Ole Miss was never really in doubt. Ale graduated from high school in the summer of 2016 and moved to Oxford the following fall. Right off the bat, she loved Ole Miss. Her plan was to study business and marketing and work in the fashion industry when she graduated, but she wasn't about to spend the next 4 years living in a library. Ale didn't waste any time making friends and getting involved in on- and off-campus activities. Ale got along with everyone. She was very bubbly and spirited, always with a smile on her face.
Ale got along with everyone. She was very bubbly and spirited. She always had a smile on her face.
Ale, what are you doing? Taking a picture for Sunsets by Ale. Follow.
Ale first met Brandon Theesfeld in the fall of 2016. He was from Fort Worth, Texas, and they were instantly attracted to each other. However, they were also polar opposites in many respects. Ale was a popular go-getter with a positive attitude, endearing herself to nearly everyone she met. But according to a fellow student who lived in the same dorm as Brandon, he was arrogant, conceited, spoiled, and even misogynistic. Brandon often made offensive comments about women and bragged about his wealthy family and how his dad could get him out of any trouble. It's unclear if Brandon behaved like this around Ale, or if she was just attracted to bad boys, but they started dating almost immediately. They regularly attended parties and sorority and fraternity functions together. However, according to Ale's friends, they were never technically boyfriend and girlfriend. In fact, Ale's friends didn't even like Brandon. Many nights, they were the ones who comforted her when he did or said something rude, insensitive, or just disappeared without letting her know where he was going or who he was with. By 2019, Ale's romantic life was a mess, but she studied hard, stayed active, and spent as much time with her friends as possible. Graduation was just a year away. Shortly before the end of the spring semester, her parents drove down from St. Louis to visit. They had such a great time together that Ale asked them to stay for a few more days. She was in good spirits when they said goodbye and pulled out of Oxford. But behind the scenes, the tension between her and Brandon was about to reach epic proportions. On April 12, 2019, Allie informed Brandon via text that she might be pregnant. She would have preferred to tell him in person, but by then, they weren't dating. Brandon ignored the text, but 2 days later, on the 14th, Allie sent him a photo of an inconclusive home pregnancy test. Eventually he replied, but his message was not what Allie was expecting. Brandon's message stated that she should terminate the pregnancy, that having a child would ruin his life, and that he wouldn't support the baby if she had it. He ended by saying he definitely wasn't going to change his mind. To a caring and nurturing person like Allie, Brandon's message must have been crushing. As the drama unfolded, he did a number of internet searches for things like morning after pills and local abortion services. Allie stayed in Oxford when most of her friends, classmates, and sorority sisters went home for the summer. It's unclear why she stayed, but she may have wanted to work things out with Brandon once and for all. Whatever the case, Brandon drove to Fort Worth for a few days in mid-July. On the way back, he posted a photo of a Glock Model 22.40 caliber pistol that his father had bought for him. The caption read, "Finally taking my baby back to Oxford." Brandon arrived back in Oxford around 6:30 p.m. on the evening of Tuesday, July 16th. Later that evening, he scoured the internet for silencers and suppressors that would fit his Glock. He also did a number of searches for things like tactical face masks and hollow point ammunition. More surprisingly, he read up on the infamous American serial killer Ted Bundy. Cindy Kostial called Allie to see how she was doing on the evening of Friday, July 19th, 2019. Allie had just woken up from a nap after a long day on campus and told her mother that she was going out that evening. She met some friends at a bar in Oxford Square that night, but Brandon sent her a text around 9 p.m. Surprisingly, he asked if he could come to her apartment, and she agreed. She may have thought he was finally ready to make amends. She called an Uber to take her home just after 11:30 p.m. About 20 minutes later, a surveillance camera captured her leaving Oxford Square alone. Less than an hour later, at 12:46 a.m., Brandon's Chevy pickup was captured by another surveillance camera traveling on West Oxford Loop near Allie's apartment at the retreat. Then at 1:14 a.m., it was seen traveling in the opposite direction on the same road. According to GPS data, Allie and Brandon's phones were traveling together towards Sardis Lake north of Oxford. Between 1:14 and about 1:55 a.m. between 2 and 2:15 a.m., someone reported hearing multiple gunshots near the lake. Later that morning, Brandon called a friend and asked if he could crash at his place because, according to him, there was an exterminator at his apartment. Brandon's apartment wasn't the site of bug killing, but he arrived at his friend's house around 10 a.m., leaving around 1:30 p.m. He did a search on the internet for Sardis, Mississippi news. Long before sunrise on the morning of Saturday, July 20th, 2019, a Lafayette County deputy was on routine patrol near Sardis Lake. The unpaved roads around the lake were dotted with dilapidated fishing cabins and dark stretches of forest. It looked like it was going to be yet another uneventful morning, until he turned a blind corner and his headlights illuminated something more horrific than he had ever seen. Just a few yards away was the lifeless body of a young woman lying face down on the ground. She appeared to have suffered multiple gunshot wounds to her back. The ground around her was littered with spent shell casings, all of which came from a .40 caliber semi-automatic handgun.
You got there, what did you find?
A white female laying on the ground with multiple gunshot wounds to her back. I have not worked a murder where somebody's been shot that many times.
The deputy immediately radioed for an ambulance and a crime scene investigator. When the ambulance crew arrived, they found Allie's purse on the side of the road. Lafayette County investigator Jared Bundren arrived a few minutes later. He found Allie's driver's license and her University of Mississippi ID card inside her purse. Investigator Bundren was no rookie, but he had never seen a victim that had been shot so many times. He never found the deceased woman's phone, but by then he had more than enough to make a positive identification. Shortly thereafter, Cindy and Keith Castile experienced every parent's worst nightmare, the dreaded call from the police in the wee hours of the morning.
Hey, Morgan, this is Micah East at the Lafayette County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling in regards to a friend of yours, Ale Kostial.
The police came to the door and they told us there had been a homicide and that she was the victim.
As word spread, Allie's friends, family members, and sorority sisters were shocked and horrified. Her high school friend Maddie Norris took the news particularly hard. Investigators began their hunt for the killer by contacting Allie's friends and acquaintances to see if they could shed any light on the brutal murder. Almost to a person, they mentioned one name, Brandon Theesfeld. Investigators never recovered Allie's phone, but luckily many of the text messages between her and Brandon had synced to her Apple phone. They eventually got a hold of Brandon on the morning of Sunday, July 21st, and asked if he would come to the station so they could ask him a few questions. He said he was busy that day but promised to come the following morning at 8:30 a.m. Investigators still weren't sure who had killed Allie, but Brandon was a person of interest from the very beginning. Needless to say, they were not pleased when he didn't show up the next morning. Instead, they received an angry call from Brandon's father, who insisted his son was innocent and warned them to leave him alone. On Monday, July 22nd, just before noon, an officer was dispatched to Brandon's apartment to do a welfare check. Brandon wasn't home, but when the officer peered through a window, he saw several items that suggested he was preparing to leave Oxford in a hurry. On the bed was a half-packed suitcase and a gun cleaning kit. The officer left the scene and informed his superior. They issued a "Be on the lookout" (BOLO) alert for Brandon's Chevy Silverado. Shortly thereafter, a detective in Memphis, Tennessee, spotted Brandon's truck parked at a gas station just 75 miles north of Oxford. Memphis police descended on the truck and arrested Brandon as he exited the store. When officers searched Brandon's truck, they found his gun inside, along with bloody clothes and 2 cans of black spray paint. They also found a letter that read, "I could feel myself slowly turning into a monster. I didn't deserve you. I betrayed your trust. I was evil. I think this is the end for me. I'm either going to prison or going to die." Investigators read him his Miranda rights and took him to jail. On the way, Brandon called his father and said, "Dad, I need an attorney. They think I killed Allie." When they arrived at the station, he asked for a lawyer again, and they took him to a cell. Later that day, a judge charged him with capital murder, and his bond was set at $250,000. Brandon was released on bond a few days later, and the case dragged on for almost 2 years. Keith and Cindy Castile were devastated. They still couldn't understand why anyone would want to kill Allie. They also refused to speak about the tragedy with anyone, especially the media. Their silence led to many unfounded rumors about what had really happened that fateful night. At one point, Brandon's attorney went so far as to suggest that there wasn't enough evidence to prove that his client was the killer. But finally, on August 27, 2021, Brandon Theesfeld pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison,